The wind whispered through the barren trees as the distant mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching across the land. On this forgotten Appalachian farm, time seemed to hold its breath. For every daughter born here, there was an unspoken truth. No girl would live past 18 without bearing her brother's child. It was a legacy older than the land itself, one steeped in dark, impenetrable secrets. The air was thick with a promise that something unspeakable would unfold. This farm, tucked away from the prying eyes of civilization, held a history known only to those cursed enough to be born here. The soil, rich with generations of blood and suffering, bore witness to a truth far more disturbing than any natural calamity. A dark ritual seemed to govern the family's every breath, every heartbeat, a sinister cycle that trapped the women in a cruel, unbreakable chain. Each new daughter was raised with the same knowledge, conditioned by the harsh whispers of the past, that they, too, would eventually fulfill the family's unnatural fate. This was not a mere coincidence. No, it was something far more deliberate, something beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. The farm's reputation spread like a fever throughout the surrounding hills. It was a place that no one dared visit, its inhabitants shrouded in an air of mystery. The eldest son, a shadow of the patriarch, ruled the farm with an iron fist. His presence was as unyielding as the mountains that surrounded them, his will as cold and clinical as the medical textbooks that lined the shelves of his modest study. He was a figure whose gaze never softened, whose hands were never clean. And yet, in his eyes, there was a spark, an unspoken understanding of the family's true power. There was a certain rhythm to life on the farm, one that was undeniably unnatural. It was a quiet, oppressive force that hung in the air, invisible but all-consuming. The girls, raised from birth to accept their roles, walked the land with the heavy weight of expectation pressing down on their fragile shoulders. Their lives were not their own. They were mere vessels, destined to repeat a cycle that had been in place for generations. The patriarch's presence was all-encompassing, a constant reminder of the family's twisted legacy. His word was law, his intentions unquestionable. But as the seasons passed, something shifted. Whispers began to surface, carried by the wind and the rustling of dry leaves. A new generation had come of age, and one daughter in particular began to question the oppressive silence that had always enveloped her. She felt the pull of something greater than her familial obligations, a force that tugged at her very soul. It was as though the secrets of the farm were starting to unravel, revealing a truth darker than anyone had ever dared to imagine. This girl, the youngest of the farm's daughters, would be the one to break the silence, though she did not yet know the cost of her rebellion. Her path, though uncertain, would lead her deeper into the heart of the family's twisted history. She would uncover secrets buried in the cold earth, knowledge that could shatter everything she had ever known. And as she took her first steps toward discovering the truth, the farm seemed to hold its breath once more, waiting for the inevitable, the moment when the past would collide with the present, and the true nature of the curse would finally be revealed. The family, as old as the hills themselves, lived in the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains, their dwelling a decaying testament to a forgotten time. The house, once a proud wooden structure, now stood crooked and weathered, its rotting timbers sagging under the weight of years of neglect. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and unwashed bodies, the walls silent witnesses to untold horrors. It was here that the curse of the land continued its ceaseless grip on the family, each generation bound by invisible chains. The patriarch of the family, a man known only as Pa, was the unyielding force that held everything together. or more accurately, together in a twisted way. His presence in the house was a looming shadow, and his power over the family was absolute. He was a man whose words were commands, whose gaze was unrelenting. His daughters, raised under his stern and ever-watchful eyes, were never allowed to stray far from their predetermined roles. They lived in a constant state of fear, their childhood stripped away before they could even understand the concept of innocence. Their lives, like the house itself, were deteriorating under the weight of time, but also under the weight of something darker, something unnatural. The girls of the family, born into this grim existence, were not allowed the luxury of growing up like others. Each of them, from the moment they reached maturity, found themselves thrust into a suffocating and oppressive cycle. Their bodies, marked by the inevitable passage of time, became instruments of the family's twisted legacy. The firstborn daughter, Mary, had become a mother by the age of 15, and her own daughters would follow in her footsteps. Every daughter bore a son, and every son shared a dark connection with the daughters, though no one ever dared to speak of it aloud. There was no room for rebellion in this cursed life, only submission to the pattern. At night, the house seemed to hum with an unnatural stillness. The air, heavy with the weight of generations, was thick with the sound of distant whispers and creaking floorboards. Pa would sit in his chair by the fire, his eyes flickering with an unreadable intensity, while the daughters would attend to their chores in silence, their faces pale, their movements mechanical. There was no love in their eyes, only resignation. They had long since learned that the only way to survive was to accept their place in the family's grim hierarchy. Yet, as much as the pattern seemed fixed, something stirred beneath the surface. The youngest daughter, whose name was Emma, had begun to notice small, strange things. At night, when the house was shrouded in darkness, she would hear faint noises, scratching at the walls, soft whispers carried by the wind. The trees outside would groan in the breeze, but there was something otherworldly about it, as if the forest itself was alive, aware of the family's dark secret. Emma would sometimes find herself staring at the walls, her eyes drawn to a peculiar mark in the wood, a shape that resembled an eye watching her. It was almost as if the house itself had a soul, and that soul was beginning to stir. It wasn't just the house that seemed to have changed. The family members, too, began to exhibit strange behaviors. Mary, the eldest daughter, would sometimes speak in a voice that wasn't her own, as though something else had taken control. Her eyes would glaze over, and she would whisper things that made no sense. Warnings of things to come, of the price they would all have to pay. The other girls noticed this too, but they dared not ask what it meant, for fear of invoking Pa's wrath. The oppressive atmosphere in the house grew thicker by the day, and Emma, now on the cusp of her 18th year, could feel the weight of it pressing in on her. It was as if something was pulling at her, trying to drag her into the same darkness that had consumed her sisters before her. But she refused to be bound by the same invisible chains. She could feel, deep in her bones, that this pattern, the family's curse, was not a mere coincidence. There was something far more sinister at play, something that had taken root in the very soil beneath the house, in the very blood of her family. And Emma would soon learn that escaping the grip of this curse would require far more than just defiance. It would demand something far darker. The supernatural whispers were growing louder now, and Emma couldn't ignore them any longer. The truth, as terrifying as it was, beckoned her, pulling her deeper into the family's web of secrets. But as she ventured closer to uncovering the truth, she would learn that some mysteries were never meant to be solved, and some patterns could never be broken. As Emma neared her 18th birthday, a sense of dread began to gnaw at the edges of her mind. a quiet unease that had grown louder with each passing day. The oppressive silence that filled the house seemed to press in on her, the air thick with secrets she could no longer ignore. She had always known that something was wrong with her family, with the farm itself, but it wasn't until now, on the precipice of adulthood, that she could no longer deny the growing suspicion that something far darker than she had ever imagined lurked within the walls. The other girls had accepted their fate, resigned to the cycle that had bound them since birth. But Emma, with her keen eyes and restless spirit, could not simply ignore the feeling that there was more to the family's history than Pa's cold, unspoken commands. She had always been curious, a trait that had often earned her sharp reprimands from her father. Curiosity was dangerous in a house built on silence and obedience, but Emma was not like the others. She did not believe that the answers lay in obedience or compliance. Her mind was drawn to the hidden corners of the farm, the places her sisters dared not enter, the rooms that were off limits, the family heirlooms buried beneath the dust of time. It was in the attic, among the forgotten relics of previous generations, that Emma uncovered the journals. They were hidden away in a small, decaying chest, tucked beneath layers of old blankets and moth-eaten garments. Their leather covers were cracked, the pages yellowed with age, yet the ink upon them remained legible. The first journal she opened belonged to her grandmother, and the words scrawled on the pages made her blood run cold. The accounts were disturbingly familiar, detailing a life eerily similar to her own. The same oppressive atmosphere, the same cold authority of Pa, the same dark, inevitable fate awaiting the daughters. The journal spoke of the cycle that had plagued her family for generations, a curse passed down through the bloodline, binding each daughter to the farm, to Pa, to the unspoken duty that awaited them all. Her grandmother's words described her own desperate attempts to break free from the curse, only to be met with failure. There was no escape, not for her, and not for Emma. The second journal, belonging to her mother, echoed similar themes. The same sense of helplessness, the same chilling acceptance of a fate beyond their control. Emma read the words, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. Her mother had known the truth all along, and yet had never spoken of it aloud. Emma could hear her mother's voice in her mind, the coldness of her tone as she had dismissed any attempt by Emma to question their reality. "This is our life," her mother had always said, "and it is the only life we can live." But now, as Emma read the journals, she understood. Her mother, just like her grandmother, had been trapped in a world that left no room for freedom, for choice, for escape. The pattern was clear. No girl born into the family could avoid the curse. It was their inheritance, their burden to bear. And, as Emma's 18th birthday loomed closer, she knew that it was only a matter of time before the same fate befell her. The tension in the air grew thick, almost suffocating, as Emma's suspicions deepened. The cold, clinical nature of life on the farm, its rigid structure, its oppressive rules, had always been a part of her existence, but now she saw it for what it was, a carefully constructed prison. The house, the land, the very family itself were all part of the mechanism that kept them bound, that ensured the cycle continued, that the curse would not be broken. As she sat alone in the attic, surrounded by the remnants of past generations, Emma felt a growing sense of both fear and determination. She had seen the truth now, seen the stories of her mother's and grandmother's lives laid bare in the journals. The terror they had lived through, the quiet acceptance that had eventually consumed them, was the same terror she now faced. The tension between her growing unease and the cold, clinical world of the farm seemed to intensify with each passing day. But Emma would not submit to this fate without a fight. The curse, the legacy, the family's dark past. It was all too much to bear. She could feel something stirring within her, a force that had been awakened by the knowledge she had uncovered. The whispers of past generations called out to her, urging her to break free, to escape the pattern that had claimed so many before her. But as the weight of her discoveries pressed down on her, Emma could not help but wonder. Was there truly any escape from the curse that bound her family? Or was she doomed to walk the same dark path as her mother and grandmother? In the silence of the attic, Emma made a decision. She would uncover the truth. She would learn what lay at the heart of the curse, even if it meant facing the terrifying unknown that had haunted her family for generations. But as she closed the journals and returned them to their hiding place, a sense of foreboding washed over her. She had awakened something that would not rest until the truth was revealed, no matter the cost. The days following Emma's discovery in the attic passed in a haze, her mind reeling from the revelations she had uncovered. What had been an eerie suspicion now felt undeniable. Her family was cursed, bound to a cycle of unspeakable acts, each generation repeating the same dark pattern. But as she began to probe deeper, seeking answers hidden in the cracks of her family's past, the world around her began to unravel in ways that defied explanation. It started subtly, the shifts too small at first to be anything more than the natural consequence of growing up. Her skin, once pale and delicate, now bore the faintest of marks, scratches that never healed properly, bruises that lingered far longer than they should have. But it wasn't the marks that disturbed her most. It was the way they seemed to change. Her body, once a familiar vessel, began to feel like it belonged to someone else. Her limbs grew heavier, her movements slower, as though something deep within her was twisting, shifting, warping her from the inside out. At night, as she lay in bed, Emma would sometimes feel a sensation in her chest. A strange pressure, as though something were awakening within her. It was a sensation that no amount of rational thought could explain. She had heard stories from her mother and grandmother of strange occurrences, of sensations that no one dared speak of, but she had never truly understood. Now she was beginning to experience them herself. It was as though the very fabric of her being was being altered, and she was powerless to stop it. The changes became more pronounced with each passing day. Her senses sharpened unnaturally. She could hear whispers on the wind, distant voices carried by the breeze, though there was no one there. She would hear the soft creak of the floorboards long before anyone stepped on them, the flicker of candlelight before the flame even wavered. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, as though she were somehow attuned to the land itself. It was an unnerving, unnatural sensation, one that left her feeling more like an observer of her own life than a participant. Then it happened. One evening, as she wandered through the fields surrounding the farm, Emma felt a sudden jolt of energy surge through her body. Her vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, she found herself standing at the far edge of the property, a place she had never consciously walked to before. The sense of time had been lost. It was as though she had been drawn to this point by an invisible force, something ancient and powerful. The earth beneath her feet seemed to hum with an energy that resonated deep within her. Her hands trembled as she reached down, feeling the soil pulse beneath her fingertips. A cold shiver ran through her spine. The transformation was not just physical. It was as if her very mind and spirit were being altered, reshaped by the unseen forces that had held her family in their grip for so long. There was a sense of being overwhelmed, as though she were being consumed by something far greater than herself, something beyond human comprehension. The next day, Emma discovered something that only deepened the mystery. As she stood before the mirror, brushing her hair, she noticed something that shouldn't have been there. The reflection staring back at her was not entirely her own. Her eyes, once a soft brown, now gleamed with an eerie, unnatural light, a flash of something ancient, something otherworldly. The pupils seemed too large, the irises too vibrant, as though her very soul had been altered, infused with something that did not belong. The changes in her were not confined to her physical body. Her dreams grew more vivid, more disturbing. In these dreams, she found herself wandering through dark, endless forests, her feet moving with a speed and grace she had never known. She would encounter figures, shadowy, faceless beings that beckoned her closer. She could hear their voices, whispering in languages she did not recognize, their words sending a chill deep into her bones. And always, there was the feeling that she was not alone, that something or someone was watching her, guiding her. As the days wore on, Emma became increasingly aware of the full weight of what was happening. These changes were not the result of illness or fatigue. They were not the byproduct of stress or a fevered mind. They were real, tangible transformations, unnatural, inexplicable. And the more she resisted, the stronger they seemed to become. One night, as Emma sat alone in her room, she noticed a strange symbol etched into the wood of the floor. It was faint, barely visible, but unmistakable. A symbol she recognized from the journals. It was the same one her grandmother had described in her last entries, the mark of an ancient pact, a sign that the family was bound not just to the land, but to something far older, far darker. The curse that had plagued her family for generations was not merely a matter of blood. It was a pact made with forces beyond human understanding. The sense of dread that had clung to Emma since her discovery of the journals now seemed to manifest itself physically. Her body, now irreversibly altered, felt like a prison. Her mind, once clear and sharp, now swirled with visions of things she could not comprehend. She could feel the presence of something lurking within her, something that had been planted there long before her birth. The changes, the transformations, these were the undeniable evidence that her family's curse had always been more than just a dark legacy. It was a living, breathing force, one that would stop at nothing to ensure its grip remained unbroken. Emma had awoken something deep within herself, and now there was no turning back. The mysteries of her family, the true nature of the curse, were no longer distant echoes of the past. They were part of her, entwined with her very being, and she could feel their pull, their undeniable power. The boundaries between the human and the supernatural had blurred, and Emma could not help but wonder. Was she becoming something more than human, or something far less? Emma's desperation had grown with each passing day, the whispers in the wind, the eerie transformation of her body, the unsettling visions, all of it pointed to a truth that she could no longer ignore. Her family's curse was not of this world. It was something far darker, something that had its roots in a time long before she was born. But there were no answers to be found within the walls of the house. Her father, the silent patriarch, would never speak of it, and the journals had offered only fragments of the truth. The questions burned inside her, suffocating her, until she knew there was only one place left to seek answers: the town's elders. The town, though small and often forgotten by the world, held secrets of its own. Secrets that had been buried under layers of time, steeped in fear and superstition. The elders, a small group of aged figures who still remembered the days before the farm's curse had taken root, were the last living witnesses to the true history of her family. They had witnessed the strange, supernatural events that had followed the family's arrival in the valley long ago. And though they never spoke of it openly, Emma could feel the weight of their knowledge. She had heard rumors of forbidden stories, tales that were whispered only in the dead of night, when no one was around to hear. One evening, under the cover of darkness, Emma made her way to the town's farthest edge, where the elders gathered. The small building where they met was tucked away behind thick trees, the windows darkened, and the doors heavy with the weight of years of secrecy. She hesitated at the threshold, her heart pounding in her chest, but a compulsion she could not explain urged her forward. She had to know the truth. She had to understand what had been done to her family. The room inside was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as the elders sat in a circle around a low fire. Their faces, wrinkled and weathered by time, were unreadable, their eyes old and wise, but tinged with a sorrow that spoke of long-held regrets. Emma's arrival did not surprise them. They had been expecting her, as though they had known that the time would come when she would seek them out. An elder, her face marked by deep lines, beckoned Emma to sit beside her. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried a weight of centuries behind it. "You've come to understand, child, but understand this. You may not wish to know what lies beneath the surface." Emma nodded, her throat dry with anticipation. She had no choice but to hear the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The elder began her story, the words slow and deliberate, as if speaking of a wound long festering. "Long ago, before your family settled on the farm, there was a pact made not with man, but with something far older, far darker. The entity that resides beneath the earth, that whispers in the winds and watches through the trees. Your ancestors sought power, a power to ensure their legacy, to make them untouchable by time. And in their desperation, they reached out to this entity. They offered their blood, their future generations, as a token of their devotion." Emma felt a chill spread through her, as though the very air had thickened with an unseen presence. She could hear the rustle of leaves outside, the whisper of wind, but it felt different now, as though the earth itself was listening. "The pact was sealed with a blood sacrifice," the elder continued, her eyes never leaving Emma's. "And in return, the entity gave them what they desired: immortality, power, and the ability to bend the will of nature itself. But there was a price. The daughters of your family, your line, were bound to this entity. Each one would bear its mark, both in their bodies and in their souls. They would be bound to the land, to the farm, to the curse that had been set in motion. They would never escape the cycle." The elder's voice faltered for a moment, a tremor of regret passing through her frail frame. "Your family's fate was sealed the moment that pact was made, and every daughter since then has been forced to bear the consequences." Emma's mind spun with the enormity of what she had just learned. The curse wasn't just a matter of bloodlines. It was a pact made with an entity beyond human comprehension, a force that controlled their every move. She had always suspected there was something unnatural about her family's history, but now she knew the truth. They weren't just victims of their own making. They were puppets in the hands of something far older, far more powerful. As the elder's words hung in the air, Emma's heart raced. She had heard stories of such things before, legends of pacts with otherworldly beings, tales of souls bound for eternity. But to realize that her own family had been part of such a story, to know that she, too, was caught in the web of that ancient deal, was too much to bear. The elder leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "You have felt it, haven't you? The changes, the whispers, the pull of something beyond your understanding. The entity watches you, Emma. It waits for you to take your place in the cycle, just as your ancestors did." The weight of the words settled on Emma's chest, a crushing pressure. She could feel the force of the curse tightening around her, could feel the entity's unseen gaze upon her. And in that moment, Emma realized that there was no escaping the past, no breaking the cycle. She was bound by the same dark force that had controlled her family for generations. The elder's final words echoed in her mind, chilling her to the core. "Your family's fate is already written, Emma, and now so is yours." As Emma stood at the edge of the farm, the distant mountains looming like ancient sentinels, the weight of her family's curse pressed heavily upon her. The night air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, a constant reminder of the land that had bound her family for generations. The truth, now fully revealed, lay in her hands. The entity that had controlled her family's fate for centuries, the pact that had bound them to the land, and the inexorable cycle that she, too, would be forced to follow. Her 18th birthday loomed on the horizon, the day that would seal her fate. The journals, the elder's cryptic warnings, the disturbing changes within her own body, everything pointed to the same conclusion. Emma was no different from the generations of daughters before her. The curse that had been woven into her bloodline was as much a part of her as the very land she walked on. There was no escaping it. And yet, as the date of her birthday grew nearer, something inside her began to stir. A desire, a desperate need to break free from the cycle, to find a way out. But escape, she knew, would come at a cost. The visions had started weeks ago. Flickers of memory, half-formed and strange, as if her mind were trying to show her what had come before. She saw the faces of her mother and grandmother, both of them caught in the same trap, both of them attempting to break free in their own way, only to be swallowed by the very forces they sought to escape. Her mother's face was pale and hollow, her eyes wide with fear as she whispered the words, "There is no escape, Emma. You must accept it." Her grandmother, too, had failed. Her body, once strong, now frail and worn, had withered under the burden of the curse, her last words a whisper of regret. "It is not for us to choose." Emma had tried to shake off the haunting images, but they clung to her, seeping into her waking hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the daughters who had come before her, each one marked by the same hollow look, the same quiet resignation. They had all accepted their fate, bowed to the dark entity that ruled their lives. And with each passing vision, Emma could feel the weight of the curse closing in on her, pulling her closer to the edge, to the moment when she, too, would be forced to make a choice. The choice. It seemed impossible to escape the pull of destiny. The very idea of defying it felt like an act of madness. Yet Emma's heart refused to accept the idea that she was condemned to live out the same life as her mother and grandmother. She was different, wasn't she? The changes in her, her heightened senses, the strange power that now coursed through her veins, suggested that there was something within her that defied the rules of the curse. She had felt it, that surge of energy, that sense of being something more than human. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a way to use it to break the cycle. But as her birthday drew near, the visions became more vivid, more real. One night, as she lay in bed, her body tense with the weight of the decision before her, she saw the dark entity itself. It was a shadow, a hulking figure, its form shifting and formless, an ever-moving mass of darkness. It stood at the edge of the field, its gaze fixed on her. She could feel its eyes upon her, cold and unblinking, a silent force of nature that had watched over her family for centuries. Its presence was suffocating, an all-encompassing void that left her breathless. In the vision, she heard its voice, not in words, but in a low, rumbling vibration that echoed in her chest. "You cannot escape what is written," the voice seemed to say, not in speech, but in feeling, in a force too powerful to deny. Emma awoke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. The vision, the presence, felt so real, so terrifyingly tangible. She knew, deep in her bones, that the entity was watching her, waiting for her to make her choice. She could feel its grip on her, tightening with each passing day, pulling her toward her inevitable fate. But still, the choice remained. Would she accept the curse, bow to the fate that had been written for her, or would she attempt to defy the entity, to break the cycle once and for all? As the day of her 18th birthday approached, Emma's mind became a battleground. Every thought, every breath was consumed by the decision she faced. She knew that to defy the entity would mean to stand alone against something far greater than herself, something that had controlled her family for generations. The cost of rebellion, she knew, could be far greater than she could imagine. And yet, in her heart, she felt a pull, a whisper that urged her to fight, to find a way to free herself from the darkness that had bound her family for so long. But at what cost? The weight of her choice pressed down on her, and for the first time, Emma understood the true nature of the curse. It was not just the land, not just the entity. It was the choices that had been made for her, the paths that had been laid out for generations. To break free from the cycle would be to break the very fabric of her family's existence. And in that moment, Emma realized that the true cost of freedom was not just her own life. It was everything that had come before her, everything that had made her who she was. The tension within her reached its breaking point. The choice was hers to make, but the consequences were beyond her comprehension. The evening air hung heavy with tension as Emma stood before the farmhouse, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the decision she had been avoiding for so long pressed down on her like a stone, and the darkness that had long suffocated her family now seemed to close in, as though it were a living, breathing entity. The last traces of sunlight had faded behind the mountains, leaving the land bathed in an eerie twilight. Tonight, there would be no more running from the truth. She would confront her father. She would demand answers, no matter the cost. Inside the house, the silence was deafening, broken only by the faint creaks of the old wooden floorboards under her feet. The patriarch's chair sat empty by the hearth, but she knew he was there, waiting for her. His presence was never far from her thoughts, an oppressive shadow that loomed over everything she did. But tonight, Emma was determined to tear that shadow from the walls and expose the truth. Her father appeared from the shadows, his gaunt face pale in the dim light of the lanterns. His eyes, cold and unyielding, fixed on her with a quiet intensity. He had known this moment would come, just as the elders had known. He was not surprised to see her standing before him, her body trembling with the weight of what she was about to ask. "You've come to ask the questions you've always known the answers to, haven't you?" His voice was low, steady, like the murmur of a river before a storm. "You want to understand the truth, but some truths are better left unsaid." Emma's voice trembled as she forced the words out, the questions that had been burning inside her for so long. "What is this curse, Father? What have you done to us? To me?" Her eyes searched his face for any sign of humanity, of the man who had once cared for her. But there was nothing. Only the cold, implacable force of the curse that had consumed him as much as it had consumed her. Her father's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile, the same smile that had haunted her childhood, a smile that had always held the promise of something darker beneath the surface. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry with it centuries of regret. "It was never a choice, Emma. It was never ours to make. We were bound to this land long before either of us was born. The pact." He hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the window, as if the wind itself might whisper the answer to him. The pact was made by your great-grandfather. He bargained with the entity that rules this land, this valley. In exchange for power, immortality, and prosperity, he promised the bloodline of his descendants. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had always known there was something dark in their family's past. But this was more than she had ever feared. "What entity?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's eyes turned dark, haunted by a memory he could not escape. "It's not a name we speak aloud, not ever. It is beyond human comprehension, beyond any mortal understanding. It is an ancient force, bound to the earth itself. The pact was sealed in blood, and for generations we've lived under its rule. The girls of this family, they bear its mark, its curse, and every one of them is bound to the same fate." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had known there was something beyond the physical realm at play, but hearing the truth laid bare before her was worse than any nightmare she could have imagined. But why? Why didn't you try to break the cycle?" Her words were thick with disbelief. "Why didn't you do something to stop it?" Her father's face hardened, the sorrow in his eyes giving way to a cold indifference. "We tried. All of us. Your mother, your grandmother, even your great-grandmother. They all fought against it, each in their own way. But this thing, this force, it never lets go. Once the pact is made, there is no escaping it, no breaking free. You can fight, but you will always lose." He stepped forward, his hand reaching for her shoulder, his touch cold as the grave. "I've watched it take everything from us, Emma. Your mother, your sisters, even me. We are all trapped in its grip." The air in the room seemed to thicken, as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. The darkness, the presence of the entity her father had described, pressed down on her with unbearable force. Emma could feel the weight of it now, the suffocating pull of the curse, winding its way around her heart like a coil. She had always known there was something unnatural about her family's existence, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it from her father's lips, made it all too real. "Then there's no hope," Emma whispered, the words slipping from her lips like a prayer. "No way to escape it?" Her father's eyes softened for just a moment, a flicker of what might have been remorse, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "No," he said, his voice cold and final. "There is no escape. You will face it just as all the others have. It's not a matter of strength or willpower, Emma. It's simply fate." The world seemed to darken further, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching long and ominous. Emma's heart raced, the truth crashing down on her like a wave. The tension in the air had become suffocating, the force of the curse wrapping itself around her in ways she couldn't explain. She had tried to fight it, to break free, but now she understood. There was no breaking free. She was bound to it. Her fate had been sealed the moment she was born. The entity, the curse, it had already claimed her. And in that moment, Emma knew the terrible truth. She was no longer just a victim of her family's history. She was a part of it. Forever. Emma sat in the worn rocking chair, its creaks and groans echoing in the dim light of the nursery. Outside, the wind howled, a constant reminder of the mountains that encircled the farm, towering and silent as they had always been. The room was eerily still, save for the gentle rise and fall of the infant in her arms, the soft murmurs of a life just beginning. She looked down at the child, her heart heavy with the weight of what had come before, and what was yet to come. Her journey had come full circle. The truths she had uncovered, the decisions she had made, the battle against fate. It had all led her here, to this very moment. The curse, the dark force that had controlled her family for generations, had not broken with her. No matter how fiercely she fought, no matter how much she had yearned to escape, the bloodline was unshakable. She had resisted, she had struggled against the pull of the curse, but it had been too strong, too ingrained. And now, as she gazed down at her child, she knew that the cycle would continue. The baby stirred in her arms, its tiny hand reaching up, instinctively grasping at her finger. Emma's chest tightened. She had promised herself that she would break the chain, that she would be the one to end this horror. But now she understood. The curse had not been meant to be broken. It had simply been meant to be passed on. The generations before her had tried, but they had only fallen deeper into its grip. And now she too would pass it on, as all the others had. She had once hoped to find a way out, to sever the connection that bound her to this land, to this family. But she had learned that some things, some forces, were beyond human comprehension. Some cycles were destined to repeat themselves, no matter the cost. And in that moment, as the child in her arms let out a small, contented sigh, Emma felt the weight of the past, the present, and the future converge in one quiet, unavoidable truth. There was no escape. The cycle would continue, as it always had. Outside, the wind carried with it the haunting whispers of a time long past. The land, the curse, the unseen entity, they were all still there, watching, waiting, just as they always had been. The shadows of her ancestors seemed to loom over the farm, their eyes watching from the darkness, knowing that their legacy had not ended but merely shifted into another generation. Emma had tried to fight it, had tried to defy the invisible hand that guided her fate, but now she understood. She was part of something much larger than herself, a force that could not be resisted, a power that could never be broken. As she rocked the chair, the house creaked in the distance. The land groaned under the weight of the centuries. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the pull of something ancient stir within her, just as it had for every daughter before her. She could feel the presence of the curse, the entity, settling over her once again. There was no escape. And so, as the night deepened and the wind howled louder, Emma rocked back and forth, the endless cycle of her family's dark history continuing with each motion. The child in her arms, her very blood, was now bound to the same force, the same fate. And though Emma had hoped for freedom, she knew deep down that no one, not even her, could escape the long, unbroken chain. As the night settled into an oppressive stillness, Emma whispered softly, as if to the wind itself. Some truths are meant to stay hidden. If this eerie tale left you questioning the forces at play, imagine what other mysteries lie hidden just beneath the surface. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories that leave you on the edge of your seat. And tell us, what do you think of the curse's true nature? Comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.